Selection Sunday can mean only one thing. The madness that is the month of March is set to begin. It's NFL free agency. What will the Cowboys do? What should the Cowboys do? Next on the Blitz.
Pops out to the right, breaks a tackle. They blitz it. Prescott throws it down the right side for Lamb. Caught it! To throw, rush, sacked by Parsons. Fade, left side. Cooper, touchdown!
And this really is March Madness, I think, NFL free agency. Welcome to the Blitz. Bill Jones with Kyle Youmans. I've got my bracket in hand. You got your bracket in hand. And should I tear it up now or should I wait until Thursday or Friday? You know, really, what we need are free agent brackets in the NFL.
That's even worse. What are you trying to bring more stress and anxiety amongst everybody who's already filling out the college bracket?
Yeah, we're just days away from the start of the NFL's new year. I think this is the show I'm most excited about of all these blitzes throughout the spring, because Kyle Youmans is back, number one, and also because this kicks off the new year. It's about to get crazy in the National Football.
It absolutely is, because there's those monumental moments in the NFL calendar. You finish up the regular season, you go into free agency, so that's this show, and then you've got the draft coming up. So I'm right there with you. This is up toward the top of the list. I think those draft shows, when you're thinking about what's going to happen once you fill those holes with free agency and then move forward, there's a lot going on in terms of the NFL offseason.
And, of course, Kyle wasn't here last week. Mickey Spagnola filled in because Kyle was in Indianapolis at the scouting combine. We'll have much more on that coming up. Really, the whole new year got started this past week. All the moving and shaking around the league, quarterbacks changing teams, that sort of thing. Let's start, though, with the Cowboys and Dalton Schultz, as the tag was applied earlier this week, as Dalton Schultz will be a Dallas Cowboy in 2022.
Yes, he will be, and that's a positive thing. Now, there's a lot of negatives around this Cowboys offseason to this point, and there was some frustration with the fact that Schultz was the one that they elected to tag, not Randy Gregory, not another name on the roster. But Dalton Schultz, with the early questions this offseason around Blake Jarwin, he had a hip surgery as soon as the season came to a close. There's concerns about how ready he will be heading into the season. If Blake Jarwin were healthy, maybe tight end's not the same type of priority. Without Blake Jarwin in the fold, Dalton Schultz all of a sudden went right up to the top of that list. You talk about the most consistent player on the Cowboys roster throughout the 2021 campaign. Dalton Schultz is on that list. 78 receptions, over 800 yards. The first tight end outside of Jason Witten in Cowboys history to have 800 yards of receiving. He was sixth in the NFL this past year, 8 touchdowns. It helps bring some guys back for Dak Prescott. That's ultimately what this offseason is going to turn into with the cap hit, with the situation that they have in terms of the money. They need to do what's right for your quarterback, and having Dalton Schultz as that consistent blanket to where you throw the football to is the reason he was targeted 104 times. That's why you needed him back on your roster.
And just one reception behind CeeDee Lamb for the team lead last season. Of course, the Cowboys having to do a lot to get ready for the start of the new year as far as the salary cap is concerned. Among the things that they did this past week as well is rework things as far as the contract of Dak Prescott and Zach Martin is concerned.
Yeah, it creates about $22 million in cap space, and the Cowboys were $22 million over the cap prior to the start of this offseason. Now, they still have a long way to go in order to make room for free agent signings. Of course, the draft class probably going to take up about $10 million or so whenever that is finally settled in. But you talk about shoring up the Schultz and the early free agency fits that this Cowboys teams are going to look at. That's what this $22 million was made for. They're still over the cap. There's still some tough question marks around DeMarcus Lawrence and Randy Gregory. Of course, with the wide receivers, Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup. We'll get to that coming up in a little bit. The deals are still going to be tight. They are very limited in the amount of cap space that they have. That's why they elected to make these deals and hopefully take advantage of a cap space in the NFL that continues to balloon as these years go along. It's not going to balloon a ton this year because of that 2020 COVID-19 pandemic. However, it will balloon in the future, and that's where they're going to try and kick that can down the road and make those contracts bigger in the later years.
And then trying to figure out which of these unrestricted free agents they can sign before they hit the open market this week. And really the negotiations between the player agents and the teams commences within about 12 hours from now. We're just getting started on this edition of The Blitz. When we come back, let's dive into those wide receivers and is C.D. Lamb, wide receiver number 1 right now.
The Blitz is brought to you by AT&T, official sponsor of the Dallas Cowboys, and by the Dallas Cowboys Football Club. This segment is brought to you by AT&T, official sponsor of the Dallas Cowboys.
The Cowboys wide receiver depth chart as they entered the month of March and into free agency, which starts this week. Yes, the familiar names right there. Who's staying? Who's going? It's the big questions that will be answered this coming week. Bill Jones with Kyle Youmans. Let's start at the top of that wide receiver depth chart, as that's been really the question, I think, over the last couple of months. What would the Cowboys do with Amari Cooper? Of course, with that big salary cap hit for 2022 and a decision having to be made by the 5th day of the new year. It's behind the scenes here at the Star in Frisco. That's the thing that's been debated and redebated, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely. It's been debated amongst the coaching department, the scouting department. You're bringing in the collegiate scouts to see, is there a guy who could replace the production of Amari Cooper? And the plain fact of the matter is that answer is no. Nobody will replace the production of Amari Cooper and what he could potentially do to open up the possibilities on a Cowboys offense. However, you have to maximize savings when you're in a cap situation with the Cowboys like they are this offseason, over $22 million plus on the cap. And you got to maximize the savings but minimize the impact. And at least this past year, you looked at your wide receiver room as a surplus with guys like C.D. Lamb, Michael Gallup, who, of course, is in that free agent conversation. You have room to maybe finagle that a little bit. You're not going to be a better team, though, without Amari Cooper, but he's just that name that you throw up there because you could save $16 million in a cap hit if you end up moving on from Cooper. It was the way that the deal was made when he signed the 5-year deal, $100 million 2 seasons ago. They had this out, kind of laid out because of this scenario working out the way it did, and he may just be that cap casualty. And that's why they call it a cap casualty. It's not supposed to be any fun.
Well, and then you look at the production from Amari Cooper this past season. He had a great first game of the year against Tampa Bay, 13 catches, 138 yards, and 2 touchdowns. His second best game of the year was at Minnesota when Cooper Rush was the starting quarterback, 8 catches, 121 yards, and a touchdown. In the other 13 games this season, Amari Cooper averaged 3.5 catches for 46 yards. For whatever reason that happened, that's one of the reasons that's too big of a salary cap hit on this roster the way it's currently put together.
Yeah, he was being paid the DeAndre Hopkins sort of money. I mean, those impact receivers, not to say that Amari Cooper isn't an impact receiver, but he's somebody who, at least for the money, isn't necessarily putting up the production in this scenario. Whether that, like you said, where that disconnect lies, maybe it's with the offensive coordinator, maybe it's with the quarterback play. Who knows what actually ended up in the lack of production this season for Amari Cooper. But now you've got other guys that you might have to put that money on because with the fact of the matter being, they're just a little bit cheaper.
Yeah, and so C.D. Lamb, you would assume, moves up to wide receiver 1. Michael Gallup getting paid as a very rich wide receiver 2, assuming they get that deal done. But the other thing that's interesting about it is Gallup coming off ACL surgery just last month. He likely is a candidate maybe to start the year on PUP and miss the first 6 weeks of the season. They are certainly a candidate to draft a wide receiver come late April.
Oh, absolutely. And we'll talk a little bit later on with David Helman about some of those wide receivers that they could have their their eye on. But with CeeDee Lamb specifically as a number 1 wide receiver, he put up number 1 wide receiver numbers. And when they drafted him with the 17th overall pick in the first round back in 2020, he was drafted to be a number 1 receiver. You don't use a 17th overall pick to draft a number 2 or a number 3 guy. This is that season, should Amari Cooper not be on the roster in 2022, that number 88 is going to have to step up.
Well, and the other thing we saw with Lamb when he came into the league, when we talk about drafting a wide receiver, these receivers are coming out of college now polished where they can contribute right off the bat. We've seen it all over the league the last couple of years.
Just look at the Super Bowl. Jamar Chase was a massive player in that run for Cincinnati. He was a rookie 2 years ago. Justin Jefferson out of LSU, he was the 22nd overall pick. He was the 4th receiver off the board, and he had one of the best rookie seasons the NFL has ever seen. Wide receivers out of college are certainly more ready for the NFL than they ever have been previously.
Okay, and guys that know about the wide receivers in this draft, that would be Kyle Youmans, that would be Dave Helman, and they're coming up next here to break it all down on the Blitz.
This segment was brought to you by AT&T, official sponsor of the Dallas Cowboys.
Curious to see this.
4-3-7. There's Garrett Wilson.
Fourteen reps. This kid has great hands on tape.
The annual NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis is in the rearview mirror. The NFL Draft just 50 days away, less than 50 days away at this point, as we welcome in David Helman to the Blitz. Kyle Youmans back with you. And, well, wide receiver is at the top of the list now for the Dallas Cowboys, or so it seems so after going into the offseason. You thought, hey, you've got CeeDee Lamb, you've got Amari Cooper, but now with questions about Cooper's future, Michael Gallup and Cedric Wilson, who we didn't get the chance to mention earlier, they couldn't be solidified into this offseason yet. How big of a need is wide receiver for this Cowboys team?
How did this happen, man? Like we just did this, you know? They just drafted CeeDee Lamb. Kind of felt like you had one of the league's best receiver cores, and then between guys hitting free agency and this Amari Cooper speculation that we continue to do, it certainly looks like a big need, like a first or second round type of need, once again, in my opinion.
And that's something that wasn't foreseen early on. You
Nope.
picked CeeDee Lamb at 17th overall 2 years
You
ago.
never know what's coming in the NFL, man.
That's exactly the case. And we still don't really know what's
Right.
happening when the draft rolls around in less than 50 days. But let's take a look at what the Cowboys could be looking at. You've got a couple first-round receivers, day one guys. Treylon Burks from Arkansas, certainly at the top of that list. What does he bring to the table, and why should the Cowboys be interested?
Look, it's easy to peg an Arkansas receiver to the Cowboys, given the Jones family's ties to that school, but this guy is impressive, man. And I'm reluctant to even say something like this, but I watch him and I'm just reminded of Des Bryant, who we all had so much fun covering and watching for so many years. He's 6'3", 230. I know another comp is Deebo Samuel. He's even bigger than Deebo Samuel and can do the same type of stuff. Like, people are going to tell you his 40 time wasn't all that impressive. 4.5 for a guy at that size is pretty darn impressive to me. And you can flip on the tape and watch him running away from SEC secondaries. He is a playmaker with the ball in his hands. I would be very excited if that were their pick at 24 overall.
The ball skills, the separation, all of which on the board whenever it comes to Burks. And also, not to mention, he played outside, he played inside, he can play all over the field. They could use him in the backfield, even in a Deebo Samuel sort of role. Now, any other day one wide receivers that catch your eye? I know there's a couple Ohio State guys in there that could potentially be in the mix.
Yeah, it's a fun year to need a receiver in this slot. You remember at 17 a few years ago, we were like, CeeDee Lamb will never be there. This year, maybe Garrett Wilson is off the board ahead of time, but whether it's Treylon Burks, Chris Olave, Drake London, the Alabama guy, Jamison Williams, who despite an ACL injury might be the most talented of all of them, they should all be around in that range. If the Cowboys want a good receiver at 24, I'm very confident one of those guys will be hanging around.
And if they don't go at 24, they don't make the pick at wide receiver in the first round, is there anybody in the second round that could be talked about?
If you remember, we did our draft show podcast with Will McClay in Indianapolis, and he was like, there's going to be 5 or 6 more freaks at receiver this year. It's just, the NFL is just, like, they are okay with this, and it's going to keep happening. These ready-made receivers keep coming out. So, yes, there's going to be some second-round guys. Jahan Dotson out of Penn State is a guy that I really like. George Pickens, who, like, very fascinating prospect just because injuries limited him so much in college, but he has got the speed to burn. He's got the size. Yeah, there's some good players on day 2 as well. If they want one, they will be able to find one.
Pickens only had 35 offensive snaps this season for the national champion Bulldogs, but hey, still could be enough.
6'3" and can run.
Hey,
come on, let's go.
He's a very fun prospect to watch. So is Darian Kennard. Is the interior offensive line the biggest need for the Dallas Cowboys?
The Blitz continues now as we take an up-close look at one of the draft prospects the Cowboys might have their eye on. They need to shore up that offensive line, and Britt Johnson takes an up-close look at one of those draft prospects now.
Thanks so much, Bill. Linebacker, safety, defensive tackle are some of the main focuses for the Dallas Cowboys this offseason, but nothing more impactful than the offensive line, which makes a player like Darian Kennard an enticing one for a possible top draft selection for the Dallas Cowboys.
We like to run downhill. We like to, make sure that the other team feels us. So I know teams are going to definitely get somebody who's a hard worker, who's gritty, who likes to run the ball, likes to run people over, and somebody's just going to keep learning the game.
Darian Kennard's versatility is what makes him a commodity. Labeled one of the best run blockers in the 2022 draft class, Kennard played right tackle on the big blue wall for the Kentucky Wildcats, but is an All-American that can play either guard or tackle.
Doesn't matter to me. At the end of the day, they're going to bring in a guy who can play 4 positions. So I'm going to go in and with the mentality of getting better and being one of the best.
You have experience on the left side and the blind side?
Yeah, freshman year. Since then, I always had to play right, and then leading into my senior year, I was going to play left tackle. And then we got Dare Rosenthal, the transfer from LSU, coming in, and I went back over to right because just like having him playing at left at LSU and then going to right tackle, it's just I put the team in a bad position playing at left. So I decided to switch back and give our team the best opportunity. And as you saw, we went 10-3, so we had a pretty good year.
The 6'5", 322-pound baller relies heavily on his athleticism, but does need to work on improving the usage of his hands, footwork, and technique if he wants to be successful in the NFL. Will he have a star on his helmet come this season? Only time will tell. Back to you guys.
All right, thanks, Britt. And when we take a look at the Cowboys' need for an interior offensive lineman, I think they've got needs across the board on the offensive line, especially when you look at the age of Tyron Smith and what Lyle Collins on the right side. Can they afford, though, not to take an offensive lineman, specifically an interior offensive lineman early in the draft?
Here's the thing. The answer is no. They can't afford to do that because, like you said, they have so many holes up front, whether it's at the guard spot, at the center spot, if you want to see an upgrade over Tyler Biadasz. And there are prospects available. Tyler Linderbaum out of Iowa is certainly a guy you could talk about. Kenyon Green out of Texas A&M could be there at pick number 24. But with those other needs, with the edge rusher being an issue, with maybe a need at wide receiver like we talked about, there are ways that interior offensive line gets left out. Guys like Darian Kennard are certainly talented enough to be taken and would play a huge role on this Cowboys offensive line. He's a fantastic run blocker, was one of the best, highest graded run blockers in the history of the SEC. He would pay dividends for this Dallas Cowboys team, but it's whether or not the board falls their way whenever pick 24 and pick 56 roll around.
And, of course, the needs could change a little bit depending on what the Cowboys do in free agency. Perhaps a veteran offensive lineman out there that they could sign. Of course, Connor Williams is an unrestricted free agent. We wrap up this edition of The Blitz and show you some of the pro days that are upcoming as we lead you up to the NFL draft in just a moment.
The Blitz was brought to you by AT&T, official sponsor of the Dallas Cowboys, and by the Dallas Cowboys Football Club.
Upcoming pro days. Oh, wow. How big is it going to be in Athens, Georgia on Wednesday? So many prospects for those Georgia Bulldogs. That tops the list of upcoming pro days. Texas A&M, under 10 days away. Baylor down in Waco coming up at the end of the month. And Bill Jones with Kyle Youmans wrapping things up. And Kyle plans to be out on the pro day trail, aren't you?
A little bit, the easy trails. I'm not going to the Georgias and the Alabamas, but I grew up in Central Texas, so I'll make my way down to Baylor. I'll be at the A&M Pro Day, but keep an eye on that Michigan Pro Day. David Ajabo, edge rusher, Dax Hill, the safety, and of course one of the top overall picks, Aiden Hutchinson, all working out in Ann Arbor. All three of those guys very intriguing, two of which, being Hill and Ajabo, could potentially be Dallas Cowboys targets.
And as I recall, the Central Texas native Kyle Youmans picked the Baylor Bears to win the national championship last year.
I did do that.
And so this year, you're going to keep it a secret.
Yeah, I'm going to keep it close to the chest. I'll tell you after we're off air, just so that way I don't put it out in the open, but I'll make it happen.
We'll announce it after the tournament is over.
That's
All right.
what I'll say.
For Kyle Youmans, I'm Bill Jones. Thanks for joining us for the Blitz. We will have another eventful episode next week, same time.